broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is Wilms Front, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's show. The date is Wednesday the 18th of November 2019. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel and also on the Tim Wilms D-Live channel. I've also got the Entropy software working again on YouTube. It wasn't a conspiracy by Google against Entropy. It was actually a software update. So there is a new version of Entropy which I've been made aware of, and I've shared the link in the YouTube live chat, so you can come on over there and ask a question throughout the evening or send a super chat to support the show. Over on D-Live, to support the show, you can send through a lemon, which is D-Live's cryptocurrency. Now, my guest here in the studio tonight is Christopher Shortis, who's a high-profile member of the Victorian patriot scene. Chris, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, Tim. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. It's an extremely hot day in Melbourne. I should just say very hot day, because we've had hot days like this before. You're a bit older than me, so you would have had experienced scorches like this. It's nothing new.
Yeah, it's nothing new, although there's a lot of young gurus out there saying we're all going to die of climate change, and I've experienced a lot more hotter weather in my younger days than what we've experienced in the last 10 years. The last real hot summer that we had that was really a belter was the year that unfortunately we had the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires, which claimed the lives of 173 people.
Yeah, that was an extremely tragic day. I remember how hot it was that day, but I still remember it being even hotter when I was in primary school. We had over 40-degree days, which it has been today. It cools down again tomorrow, but then warms up on Friday. But it's been an extremely cool summer, I'd say, in Melbourne.
Look, it's cyclical. I'm not going to read too much into it. I mean, Australia actually has folklore, you know, like droughts and flooding rains. There's nothing new. I think the worst drought to date is the drought of the Federation, you know. So look, there's different dynamics to what's happening today. I mean, it's not drought that's actually destroying the Murray-Darling River system, for example. It's actually our government selling us out and allowing big multinational companies to grow cotton and taking all the water from the Darling. So Australia's not government is not defending the Constitution, Section 100, for example, which is about the abridging the right of reasonable use of waters from our rivers and streams to the states and irrigators, you know, for conservation and irrigation.
Well, that's a whole other topic, which, well, it's turning into a political shit fight at year's end, but I didn't have you on tonight to talk about the weather. We are going to air tonight. It's on the eve of the verdict of Blair Cottrell's appeal trial. Now, you, Blair and Neil Erickson, you were found guilty and fined $2,000 each at a trial at the Melbourne Magistrates Court in September 2017 for breaching Section 25(2) of the Victorian Racial and Religious Tolerance Act 2001, which is a criminal provision for inciting serious contempt or severe ridicule and revulsion of Muslims. And this was over to the three of your participation in a mock beheading stunt that was filmed outside the Bendigo City Council building. A dummy was beheaded with fake blood pouring out, and that was uploaded to Facebook and tied in with promotion for an upcoming rally against the mosque application in Bendigo. So tomorrow, Chief Judge of the County Court of Victoria, Peter Gibb, will be handing his judgment down. The 4-day trial occurred November 11 to 14.
Yep.
Now, obviously, there's more to your activism than obviously that high-profile video. So you were obviously the video was released on the then United Patriots Front Facebook page, which you were a senior member of.
Yes.
You're still a member of the Australia First Party, led by Jim Salim, and you've also produced videos for the United Nationalists of Australia, which is primarily a blog run by Nathan Sykes, who is also a member of Australia First, but you currently... Your main method of communication is your occasional show, the Bowman, but most of your time over the past 2 years has been occupied by studying a law degree, which you've just finished your second year now.
That's correct. Actually, it's a double degree because I'm actually doing Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Law, and the reason is because the arts degrees covers a diverse range of political type subjects. Like one of the subjects I did this year was called The Nature of Democracy, and I finished a American politics unit as well as doing Australian public law and commercial law. So I've done 5 law units, which is criminal law and procedure, legal writing, and contract law as well. It is going well, and I'm really surprising myself. It is a tough gig. I never did year 10, 11 and 12 at high school, and that's why I find writing a little bit tough, but I'm pushing through it and I'm getting good grades, and I'm very happy with my progress. And look, it is a revelation on how our system works, particularly in public law. I'm really getting a lot out of it, and I'm trying to prepare myself for whatever future it may be, whether it be in legal practice, that's if I'm permitted at the bar, or I'd like to eventually run for Parliament, but I'm just preparing myself. And I would encourage those who feel convicted of getting a university education, do it. You'll have to run a gauntlet, which there's a lot of progressive or left-wing influence, but if you can go there and articulate your argument, use an authoritative source, and you're just generally respectful in your discourse, but at the same time, you can be, passionate, and you can be, that's what debate is all about. University are very happy to have that environment. So we have to run the gauntlet. These institutions are there for us all. They're not just there for those who are of the left side of politics. They're there for anyone who wants to get an education, and I'm really benefiting tremendously as a result.
Now, you started your arts degree initially, then your law degree. This was after the September 2017 trial, where the three of you represented yourselves, and
yes.
And obviously it didn't work out since Blair had a conviction recorded against him.
Yep.
But the three of you were each found guilty and fined $2,000 each.
But I had a conviction against me too.
Oh, you did as well?
Yes, and Neil as well.
Oh, okay.
We all got the exact same punishment, which was a little bit sort of strange, playing devil's advocate, because they really ignored what was previous history. So I never had a conviction prior to.
Well, the law had never been used. This section had never been used before.
No, it hasn't, and it's a bizarre law. And the only thing that stopped me from continuing my legal pursuit against it is it's an issue of money. And the biggest problem that I have found in this country, we don't have an equitable legal system. It's very hard to actually get good legal representation. Legal aid is just a debacle, and it's a financial issue, and I weighed that financial issue against where I'm at in life. I had a wife to consider, owned my own home, and for what is and let's not beat around the bush. It's a summary offence. In the context of law and its seriousness, right, it's piss in the wind, right? It's only the state who wants to blow it up into something that it's not. Although, the reason why I'm studying law, because I still believe there is a way to actually challenge the validity of the sections themselves, which in my eyes is Section 24 and Section 25 of Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, because I believe it is inconsistent with federal legislation. There's no criminal provision, as far as I'm aware, in the federal legislation.
Well, Blair Cottrell and his lawyer, John Bolton, they've challenged it on 3 grounds. The substantive charge, because Section 25(2), the prosecution has to prove intent, that is your intent to incite this revulsion, ridicule, and contempt, which basically you have to get inside someone's head, which is an incredibly... Nobody can... It's never been...
Okay, well, let's deal with the intent issue. The problem is with modern law, and that is, I believe, because of the influence of progressive politics, judicial activism, it's because they want to stay in the realm of subjectivity, right? Because subjectivity, the burden of proof for subjective things is a lot less than an objective test. Right, and proper law, right, is got to be dominated by an objective test with subjective elements, right? And the problem is that our case was built around is that, well, we think that you're going to create serious contempt and ridicule and revulsion for a class of persons, and somehow that it was going to lead to further discrimination against Muslims. It's funny because no Muslim made a complaint, so that's how serious they took it. And secondly, the state of Victoria has decided to be offended on behalf of a class of persons. Now, that's denied us mediation, because why would we want to speak to the state government? Or the DPP?
Well, it's a criminal provision, so the rest of the law is a civil provision, which that's where it comes into mediation.
But that's my point, right? That's why it's inconsistent, right? And it needs to be challenged at a higher court in its consistency against the Australian Constitution, okay? Because you've got to remember one thing. What few people realise, Muslims, Sikhs, and Jews can actually use the Racial Discrimination Act, right? And have been able to since they amended the Racial Discrimination Act in 1995. Because in 1994, they had an explanatory memorandum, right, saying that these
classes... Well, that's when they introduced, the racial vilification laws, which the most famous section is Section 18C, which Andrew Bolt was...
well, before you get to that, before we get to Section 18C, I'm merely making the point is that they've made, right, Jews, Sikhs and Muslims a class of persons so that they can use Section 18C, right?
And this is the whole... the online writers, if you want to call them that, they've always had the slogan, Islam is not a race, but you're saying that that's not what our law says.
No, because in the explanatory memorandum, what they did, and it is true in a context, right? Because Jews, Sikhs and Muslims have characteristics beyond skin colour which defines what is their culture.
Well, Jews, it's both a religious and ethnicity as well.
Well, I don't believe Jews are an ethnicity because I've done a video on that. I've still got that video, but that's another argument. But Muslims are made up of many different races, and Sikhs, well, they're probably the only group of people that would be, specifically
India's complicated in the different religions and ethnic groups and caste system. That's much more complex. I don't think we could get into.
Well, that's more into the Hindu side of things. But Sikhs being a separate class from the Hindus, and that's what you're referring to. The bottom line is Section 18C, right? I'm gonna give you a tip, right, on Andrew Bolt. Right, because it was about it's too hip to be black, right? So hip to be black, right? And because I met the woman who actually filed a complaint against him, and I can tell you something now. If I was a judge playing devil's advocate and knowing the law the way I do, I would have found guilty Andrew Bolt guilty under 18C too, right? Because we've got to remember, I'm not talking about whether it's right or wrong. I'm talking about the reality, because I don't like 18C either. right? And unfortunately, the progressive side of politics are going to use these laws against those who speak out against them. So therefore, if you look at 18C, never talk about Section 18C, which is the offence, right, of discrimination or whatever, right, against a race, right, or class of person. You've got to stay in the realms of Section 18D, which is the exemptions under the Act.
Yes, that's what, in the debate about whether to repeal or reform 18C, the defenders of the section have said, well, look at these defences in 18D, and their justification for finding Bolt to have breached 18C is because what he wrote was malicious and factually wrong.
He got personal, and there were elements that weren't factual, that he was incorrect. He got personal. This is the problem. It wasn't civil discourse. If Andrew Bolt had have gone to these people who get grants from the government, it is legitimate to ask, for example, I'm trying to speak in lines of Section 18D, right? If Andrew Bolt had to simply ask, well, this woman or this man claims racial heritage of Aboriginality, right? Now, if that person only has, say, 1/24th Aboriginality, right, and the rest is something else, it is genetically science that person is more of something else than of Aboriginal, right? But being something else doesn't grant you certain rights that Indigenous people have. Now people are going to say, oh, but but it's they consider themselves Aboriginal. That's the way they identify. Well, even the Treaty of New Zealand don't work like that, because when it comes to native title in New Zealand and this dual system that they have, where they have parliamentary representation, a Maori has to prove 50% Maori. Because if you look at it genetically, right, if you're only a minority Aboriginal in your bloodline, right, whether it be, if you're less than half, that means the other lot, you're more of something else. And Andrew Bolt could have been a lot more civil in his explanation, because he was when I read it, because I've got the article in the link and I've read it through.
But even though it's been technically banned, like, you can still get us.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, right, he was, and I know it's not fair. I'm not talking about fair, right? I'm just speaking about the reality that we find ourselves in, and we need to learn to use the system, right, and be careful about our words. Now, when I look back to, say, the mock beheading that I did, right, now putting on my 2019 goggles, I would have done it differently.
Yes, there's obviously, hindsight is probably the greatest.
Wouldn't need these.
Yes. I just move. You're moving close to the edge of the screen there, so just move towards me.
Oh, yep. There we go.
So you mentioned the Federal Racial Discrimination Act, and so obviously the three of you were convicted under as a state law, and what's in the news again in New South Wales, their Anti-Discrimination Act 1977, because Gary Burns, who's a serial homosexual litigant, has been granted leave by the tribunal for a complaint against Israel Folau for his Sinners Instagram post. And the reason why all of these hate speech laws can be legislated in Australia is because we don't have what the United States has, a First Amendment. We don't have a Bill of Rights, but what we do have is an implied freedom to political communication. And I sat in the court for the 4 days of the trial, and the Crown prosecutor, she went into a lot of case law about this High Court decision, which was in 1992. It was to do with political advertising.
That's right.
That it's not an individual right. It's a limit on legislative power, and that for a law to be struck down as violating that freedom to political communication, it has to have a substantive burden on the freedom. It can have some burden, but not a substantive burden.
Exactly.
And so they argued that Blair, he'd only ever been prosecuted for this mock beheading stunt because it was just so extreme and absurd. And so they said like he's free to say whatever else that he wants.
I'm going to address what you've said about Israel Folau, and this is my opinion on Israel Folau. He had the means on which to take it all the way to the High Court, and he should have, because he wasn't exercising an implied right. He was expressing what is a constitutional right under Section 116. Okay, and there's case law regarding, high case law, regarding that his tenants are not subject to law, right, of his faith, right? I hate to say it to the gay community, right? If you don't repent in the name of Jesus Christ, you risk the damnation of hell, right? That's just what the texts say. Section 116, if you want to take me to court, well, mate, take me to court. But I have a right to express my faith. But Jesus loves you, and that's exactly what Israel Folau did. Israel Folau's mistake is that he should have taken that fight, and he should have taken Rugby Australia all the way to the High Court, if necessary, because he had the means to do so. Now he's got to fight anyway. As to the next question regarding, your implied political freedom, that was established in 1992. That was Lang and ABC, or Australian Broadcasting.
That was that was a subsequent decision to, it was the Australian Capital Television one. That's right. But Lang went into more detail about how the test about whether
two-question test, right? That two-question test. The first question is: does the law have a heavy burden, or this I'm paraphrasing it, a substantive burden on implied freedom, right? If the answer is yes, go to question 2. Is the law made in accordance to responsible and representative government and in the maintenance of the Constitution? Now, that was sort of altered in the McCloy New South Wales case, where they added balance, proportionality and those elements to it.
Do you mind just a brief explanation of each of those ones? I went into brief about Australian Capital Television. That was when the Keating government passed political advertising restrictions. Yep. Lang versus the ABC, that was a defamation case. But McCoy, I heard the name a lot, but it didn't necessarily stick in my head throughout the part. So can you just explain what that case was?
Okay, well, it goes to the two-question test of the Lang test, okay, right? And the first question is like, does the law overburden implied freedom, right? And if it does, go to question 2. What the McCloy and New South Wales case does expand on it and uses elements such as balance, proportionality and all that sort of thing. And in Club and Edwards, that was the McCloy test was used because of the restriction zone of abortion, 150 metre exclusion zone, right?
This audience will know who Kathy Clubb is. She appeared on this show. Exactly.
And what it was is that the High Court found, well, no, your communication wasn't even political in nature, and secondly, right, it's not an overburden because you're free to actually have your opinion on the issue of abortion, right, but just outside these 150 metre exclusion zone.
The court also found, if I remember correctly, that she was interfering with a medical decision.
Well, it was more specifically that your rights to have an opinion on this issue does not give you the right to harass people trying to enter what is legally acquired services on that issue. So that's why they created that exclusion zone, so that these people could go in there without being molested by these people, right? Now, that's got nothing to do with what my personal view is on that.
Yeah, that's just what the court said.
I'm just giving you what is the legal explanation. So, and I agree with it because, well, you can have that view.
Yeah, even though that's what the court found, Kathy Clubb certainly didn't do that. She's one of the nicest people.
Of course, but she entered that zone and
which is against the law.
Right, and the court found that even your presence is enough to intimidate people acquiring these services. That was the words of some of the judges.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not because you're a nasty person or anything like that, although there's been bad behaviour by others, but they specifically stated that just your presence within that 150 metre exclusion zone would intimidate the women that are requiring these services.
And we know in 2019 that with people's feelings, the sensitivities, the way they are, it's very easy to prove intimidation.
Look, you're right on one breath. I agree with that. But secondly, in the context of just on that particular case, in a way, I don't find that unreasonable, even though I find the issue, like I'm a pro-lifer, being a Christian, obviously, myself. But I can understand from a legal standpoint. So because it's a monstrous decision that any person has to make, right? I mean, a lot of women that are seeking terminations of pregnancy, for example, while I find it, they shouldn't do it because I think God doesn't want them to do it. Most of them don't go around there, with a party hat going, I'm getting an abortion today. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right? So it's a question of protecting these people that are already in a emotionally compromised situation mentally. We have to acknowledge that. So that's where they get their reasoning. That's basically it for that. But certainly when it comes to the Bendigo Three, I mean, 25.2, or Section 25 and Section 24, to me is invalid, and it is an overburden of implied communication because of the circumstances on which I would have personally, if I took it further, I would have argued differently to that.
I want to stay on that topic of intimidation because this is, there was not just a Crown prosecutor, but the representative from the Victorian Attorney General's office, Jill Hennessy, and he argued that the reason why this law needed to be upheld and why the three of you were prosecuted is because the video that was released would have deterred Muslims from participating in the democratic process, because he goes into the preamble of the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, the proposed legislation, which is to preserve multicultural Victoria, Australia, and that we don't want to limit free speech. We want to.
But that's an opinion.
Yes, but that's what the preamble to the legislation said.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that is an opinion.
That's
this case needs to go to the High Court. It's got to find the legislation itself, because I'm sorry, Jill Hennessy, that's bullshit, right? That's an opinion, right? It's an opinion because it was so serious. I get back to the same issue. No Muslim made a complaint, and to actually, I would say, if anything, what we did has encouraged more Muslims to actually enter into political life rather than the opposite, right? Because that's what I'm saying about the subjectivity. This is what I hate about modern law with this judicial activism. The burden of proof that used to be up here is coming right down to it's a matter of opinion. And I'd just like to throw in as a bit of a, jibe at Victoria Police. It's not like they hold themselves with glory, that they obey the law themselves. Lawyer X, you don't mind using barristers as police informants and everything like that. So to be quite frank, I'm not going to be lectured by you lot. So, law is what you say it is at any given time to suit your political narrative. And that's what it's come down to. But an issue like this, Tim, right, that's only made it to the county court. Unfortunately, the only way we can have an absolute slam dunk resolution is that a High Court's got to make a judgment on it.
Well, that's what John Bolton and Blair Cottrell, they originally applied to the High Court, but they sent it back to the County Court of Victoria so that they wouldn't hear the case until all avenues of appeal had been exhausted.
That's because the High Court is actually respecting the process. They're respecting the other jurisdictions of court, because unfortunately Blair decided to go to the county court, right? Well, you can't just go changing your mind because it doesn't suit you, right? And the High Court is going to uphold what is process every time. It's as simple as that.
And there was a special mention back in July when the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, because they're also appealing on that ground as well. John Bolton applied for it to be held in the Supreme Court, but that was also the judge at the time, Lisa Hannan, said, I can hear all the matters here. And the Victorian Charter, it's called a Charter of Rights and Responsibilities because the rights, we should also explain, rights are not just your right to free speech. That's called, the United States Bill of Rights is what's called a negative, it has negative rights, that this is what can't be done, what the government can't do to you. But the positive rights, the government must provide, and there's sections in the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibility about making sure that cultural rights are protected, and that's the government's role. It's actually putting a responsibility on government.
Okay, but I mean I'll give you the section that's relevant to it, and that's section 15 under the Human Rights and Responsibilities Charter, the 2006 Act, section 15, because it talks about that you can have communication, right, without frontier, but there's little clauses saying that there is about responsibilities. That's the reason why they throw in the responsibilities clause. But in saying that too, you go back to what is, and because the state legislation in elements, because not all of Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act measuring against the Constitution is inconsistent as far as I'm concerned, because it does have section 11 of Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, where it is nearly word for word to section 18D, the exemptions under the Act. But the only difference is, and this is another thing that I find bizarre, is because it only mentions section 7 or 8, which is using these words, the civil version of section 24 and section 25. See, section 24 and section 25 shouldn't be there, because the word hate, believe it or not, is actually not used in section 25 too.
No.
But it's actually used in section 8 and section 7.
And that was section 8. That was the section where, the other, it wasn't a prosecution, it was a complaint. Pastor Daniel of the then Catch the Fire ministries. There was he was. I'm not sure if he was recorded, but there was certainly somebody who complained about a sermon that he delivered
in a church,
criticising the Quran, and there was also a newsletter that was published as well, and that was eventually overturned, but not before.
Supreme Court.
And Danny Nalia, he's lucky he's got generous followers of his church, because it costs astronomical amount of money and years.
Yeah, well, this is the point that I was making earlier regarding our legal system. Legal aid is a farce, right? And the amount of justice that you can receive these days depends on how much money you got. It's as simple as that. And this is really concerning, and there needs to be reform regarding legal aid, because we need to, be able to have ethical legal representation for people who can't afford these extravagant fees for lawyers.
It seems that legal aid, it only benefits the socialist activists who police force might tread on their foot, and they get some pro bono representation to put a complaint in against the police, for example.
Well, I mean, I can't specifically.
It might not be legal aid, but there's all these various community legal centres.
Okay, but I mean, it's volunteer type stuff, right, for their activism. A lot of them is for these refugees, for example. But the point I'm trying to make is that what we have lost in this country, and it's concerning as a citizen, and that's the reason why I'm seeking a university education, is that we're no longer equal under the law. I mean, look at me. I'm a white, middle-aged, heterosexual man who's a Christian, who has nationalist politics. I'm at the apex of xenophobe, according to the progressives. So, apparently, I don't matter. My rights don't matter, but we're all equal under the law. And the greatest crime that's happening in Victoria at the moment, and hope you're listening, Graham Ashton, that we have the largest organised crime gang in Victoria, called the Victoria Police. They're going through the Royal Commission because they've attacked the very heart of the justice system. So
And that is, people need to understand how affront that is to how our legal system is to operate, because you're entitled to a fair trial and a legal representative who's going to act in your interest. And how can that happen if your lawyer, who has said to your face, I'm going to represent your best interest, and is informing on you? That's abhorrent.
Well, let's just go through the particulars, right? 3 facts. You have the presumption of innocence under our common law heritage, right? You have the right to a fair trial. Thirdly, you have the right to legal representation, lawyer-client confidentiality, right? Now, those things were just smashed out the window, right? These things were attacked and abused by the police hierarchy. And as a citizen, we shouldn't tolerate this. This is not a left or right issue. This is an issue that is a massive public interest issue, right? And here are the State Attorney General, right, and these police commissioners, because of their progressive politics, lecturing us about, we've got a multicultural society, we're enforcing the law. No, you're criminals. You're criminals that are violating the very heart of the law. And let me prove that. The Herald Sun sought an injunction to actually release the details of Lawyer X. The High Court granted that injunction after the Victoria Police spent $4.5 million trying to stop it.
And years.
Yeah, years. And the High Court basically said the conduct of Victoria Police concerning Lawyer X was reprehensible, and that your actions attacked the very heart of the justice system. And I'm never going to forgive this state for, 1, what they did to me, for 2, the way they behave, and hypocrisy is just absolutely outstanding. And those that are on the left that are a little bit sensible, right, let's understand one thing. We're obviously going to disagree on political points and religious points, right? But our biggest enemy that we have in the state of Victoria at the moment isn't me as a conservative or right wing or whatever you want to label me, because I'm that sort of way. It's not the left from my point of view. You should realise that the biggest enemy is not the right from your point of view, but the biggest enemy that we have is the executive.
Well, they claim that they don't like the police or the state,
exactly.
But they're extremely confused these days, because they still consider you and the patriots and nationalists the greater enemy. And I've seen...
Oh, not all of them, to be fair. Not all of them.
Well, I've seen, Slack Bastard, the most prominent anarchist blogger, basically saying, ASIO needs to watch more people like you, which, hang on, you're empowering the state more to surveil people.
Well, I mean, you've got to understand, you've got those from let's just say, a right-wing strand, right, and those of a left-wing strand. Now, these are just obviously, colourful metaphors, but, I put it to you that there are certain those of the conservative side of politics, which we call neoconservatives, right, that would do the same thing. They would take away power from those that are moderate left so that they would shut down their political communication. I referred to you to a 1950 case, Communist Party versus the Queen.
Yes, when Robert Menzies passed legislation to ban the Communist Party of Australia, that was found invalid by the High Court. He decided to go to a referendum which didn't pass.
But it was an oxymoron too, because if you're a communist, we're going to have legislative power to actually deprive you of private property rights, which is an oxymoron from neocons, right? And then to rub salt into the wounds, we're going to take it to a referendum. But see, even back then our society was quite divided, because when they had the referendum, it was only similar to the Brexit result. It was only 52 to 48.
Yeah, but we live in a majority system, even though it's called tyranny of the majority. That's how every decision is made nearly in society. Obviously, when it comes to juries, it has to be unanimous, guilty or not guilty. That's one of the exceptions, but that's how most of the decisions are made in our society.
Well, I mean, we don't have complete tyranny of the majority here, because it's not at the expense of individual rights. And I want to refer to our Constitution, for example. That's the reason why we have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate, right? And it's very rare that a government actually acquires both houses of Parliament, and that's why they have to negotiate with the Senate, because people don't want to have their own individual rights. Because just imagine one day, and we're in the projection to be that case, that Christians happen to be a minority. Well, Section 116 still protects my rights, whether we're a majority or a minority of people.
This is why I've been firmly against the federal proposal for a religious Discrimination Act, because it's come out of the radical review into religious freedom after the same-sex marriage survey, because a lot of Christians were worried their free speech was going to be taken away. But if you ask Bernard Gaynor, who's been dealing with Gary Burns for a number of years, well, that was way before same-sex marriage was legalised. But as is the case with the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act in Victoria, it's not to protect Christians, it's for other religions. And so do you really think that a federal religious discrimination act is going to prioritise Christians' protections over, say, Muslims or anyone else?
No. I think this is a bad move, and it's, I mean, you know, as much as some of the good work the Australian Christian lobby has done, it's not a celebration at all. But, you know, Parliament is going to make amendments to what is this piece of legislation. We're basically asking the devil to say, please don't discriminate against us, right? And we have Section 116 in the Constitution. I've got a couple of case laws which protect individuals' rights to have religion or even not to have religion, right? And the bottom line is, the problem that we have is that we need more people on the right, quotation marks, to actually get into our system. We need more people that are willing to run for Parliament. We need more people to be willing, you know what, I should be a university lecturer, because the one thing that the left have been better than the right at over the last 3 or 4 decades is activism. They've been better at it. That's the reason why you have a heavier left-wing influence.
You look at Rebellion Week by Extinction Rebellion. Yeah. They managed to. Well, they still, in my opinion, they pissed more people off than they won over. But they were still doing activism, which was getting media coverage, and obviously the media is a lot more sympathetic to them. But
that's more street activism. Let me go to a more of a legitimate political activism, which involves polling booths and everything like that. Stephen Jolly, the Victoria Socialist Alliance, right? Now, he didn't win a seat, but I actually rang him up to congratulate him.
Well,
because
he got more votes in Northern Metropolitan than Fiona Patton, who eventually went to, but it was the preferences that knocked him out.
That's right, but I mean, I'm merely making the point that he contested 15 seats.
Yeah, and he is, I will give him credit as well. He's I would say the most successful, and also I'd say hardworking and smartest socialist activist of his generation.
There was a couple.
I mean, a lot of these young people who are in charge today, they don't know anything.
Look, I tell you what, there's a couple of things that he brought up, you know, there's a couple of public policies that he came up with that I actually don't disagree with. So not everything that the left do is wrong, just like everything that the right do is not right. You know what I mean? We have to actually start to get into the system by embracing it instead of rejecting it. Okay? Now, because if we don't, right, the left are going to continue to advance. And to be honest with you, if they continue to advance, that is because our side will continue to be apathetic. Because it's not a question, Tim. We've come to a point, it's not a question of wanting to do it. We've come to a point in our nation, is that, are you willing to do it because it's duty? Are you willing to fight for your political persuasion? We have a parliament for that reason.
It seems at the moment the patriot nationalist movement in Australia is in a bit of a lull, because, well, it was basically reborn with the United Patriots Front in 2015 with the Bendigo rallies, but it was completely based on Facebook. And as we've seen in the years since, that Facebook has cracked down on hate speech, extremism, and Blair Cottrell, Neil Erickson, Tom Sewell, who's the leader of Lead Society, and Sherman Burgess, who founded the United Patriots Front originally, have all been banned and disabled from Facebook and Twitter. You're the only one who's left.
Well, it's the problem is because I felt like, well, were they really serious enough to actually go to politics? Because I actually put in a bit of coin to actually try and get Fortitude off the ground.
Yeah, that was going to be the political party of the political party arm of the United Patriots Front.
Well, look, that's something that failed, and things you try, things you do, you don't always succeed, but that's why you try again, and you got to fight hard. But it's about learning the system. Because the system can work for us if we're willing to learn how it operates, right? And we need to actually accept one thing. We've got to stop complaining that it's not fair. Well, life is not fair. Life is not fair. So therefore, if we accept the fact that it's not fair, that should motivate to go, you know what? How can I fight to make it fairer, right?
Yeah, it's what's called being black-pilled, is that you just think that there's no hope, which basically you believe that there's not much point in trying anymore.
No, well, I think a lot of people, that I haven't been black-pilled. I'm not going to give up on anything. All I'm doing at the moment is just preparing myself, and that's why my energies over the next 3 years is going to be, obviously my university degree. I mean, I've got to basically, get the credentials necessary. Hopefully I can network with enough people over the next few years and try and inspire people to think about what they're doing, right, and get involved more politically. Now, I know we all have to work. I know that, right? We all have to try and survive.
Yeah, and this is also the I don't say it as a form of excuse, rather than just sort of explanation, and that a lot of the Patriot movement is working class, and they've got families who they need to put food on the table for, and they're in the trades, which is a hard slog. You get up at 5 a.m. in the morning, start at 7, and you might knock off at 4, but then got to pick up the kids from school, and it's family time for the rest of the day.
The bottom line is that we've got to fight, and we've got to believe that we can win. I mean, look, I see some of the comments up on screen, right? To Dan Wandon, right? Stop thinking of all the reasons why you're losing and start thinking about how you can win. Well, mate, you can only think about how you can win if you look back and look in the mirror and find out where we've gone wrong and how we can do things better. Because we can't be blind to the mistakes that we have. I have to acknowledge that, my political activism brought me with loggerheads with the state. I've paid a price for it. But I'm grateful at the same time, because if I hadn't have done my political activism, I wouldn't be studying law and doing my double degree.
Because there's been consequences for you personally. You lost your firearms license, and you were unable to obtain a security license.
Correct.
You went to VCAT earlier this year. That was denied, and even though VCAT is just a tribunal, the state, they made sure that they had resolved.
Well, they're part of the executive. It's a quasi-court, and at the end of the day, right, the Commissioner's office decide that I'm not a fit and proper person to have a firearms licence or to have a security licence. This is the same Commissioner's office that uses bloody barristers, right, as police informants. So, you know what? I couldn't really give a damn.
Well, in terms of why should the state be in charge of security licensing? I mean, shouldn't it be up to this is my libertarian streak, why should the state dole out who is allowed to be a security person, or who, like, there's been new licensing, state-issued licensing system against software engineers, like people who just write code. Why does the state need to why do they need to get involved in licensing that?
Look, the Firearms Act produced one deadly thing, right? Forget about the restrictions on the top of the firearms that you have. The greatest thing that the Firearms Act created for the states was to empower police commissioners with discretionary powers. In other words, they can decide that someone's not a fit and proper person. So, unfortunately, the change in our nation, as a 48-year-old man that I've seen over the last 20 years, the burden of proof, we've gone from transforming to a society where you have the presumption of innocence to a society where you have the presumption of guilt, right? And I'm very concerned, and throw in the fact that the burden of proof has been so low that everything's just subjective.
Well, I'll give you a recent example of that. I'm not sure if you're aware of the CPAC Australia conference that was held in Sydney in August. The organizer of that, Andrew Cooper, he got what's called a Section 45(2) letter under Australia's foreign interference laws. It basically said, give us basically every single document and video communications that's ever been associated with CPAC Australia, otherwise we'll arrest you. And basically he had to... The letter basically said you're guilty unless we're satisfied that you're not, you don't have to register under this foreign transparency scheme. And even though this legislation was designed, obviously Chinese foreign interference is what Australia is facing. That's what ASIO has been talking about, the former director Duncan Lewis, but the Federal Attorney General's Department, they've only issued this notice to Andrew Cooper. And the thing was, this was a law passed by the Turnbull government, and they passed this completely perverse law which tore up, as you said, the presumption of innocence. Andrew Cooper he's refused to produce the documents, and so he is liable for arrest, but that hasn't taken place. But that's what the law that was passed treats him as.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull, right, Mr. born with a silver spoon.
Oh, well, he was self-made, a lot of, but he certainly today...
You know what? Religiously, he's a bastard, all right? He doesn't know God. He's a bastard, all right? He's an absolute toffee, ivory tower progressive, right? And that man would have to have been the worst Prime Minister in Australia's history.
I think a lot of people left and right would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Which says a lot.
Yes.
But yes, that law, well, Andrew Cooper, as CPAC stands for Conservative Political Conference, that law was passed by a Conservative government, and it's being enforced against a Conservative. But we've digressed here in that... This is also the downside of us not having a bill of negative rights, in that these laws can be passed which completely reverse the what are our basic legal principles that Anglo legal systems were based on.
Well, look, I will caution you when you say that. It depends where you are in America. Okay, at the end of the day, right, it doesn't matter what laws there are, right? They can be changed or they can be corrupted. There are places in America, right, where you would get stuff done that's just as ridiculous as here in Australia, yet they have a Bill of Rights. Because you've got to understand, our Constitution, we have not only implied rights, but we have actually slam dunk rights too. Okay, we have the right to jury, that's under Section 80. That's not an implied right at all. Section 116 is certainly not an implied right. Section 41 is not an implied right. So they only draw off Section 7 and Section 24 when it comes to implied political communication, for the simple reason that we, the people, directly vote in our representatives in both the Senate and the House of Reps. Right? So... any alterations to the Constitution, right? I mean, we could use our existing Constitution and go, okay, why don't we add in a subsection like there are in, under Section 51, there's 39 subsections, right? So Section 116, you have the religious component, but you could have subsection 1, the right to free speech, right? Obviously, subjected to, you'd write a clause in there, right? And subsection 2, freedom of assembly. right? All these amendments, our Constitution, it's possible to make amendments to it, right? Even though there hasn't been a lot of them. There's only been 44 referendums with...
Well, 8 have only passed.
Exactly.
And they've basically been about changing the powers between the ones that are passed, between the Commonwealth and the states.
Yeah, also there's been the most successful referendum in history is the 1967 vote regarding Aboriginals to vote.
Well, that was actually about, they had been granted citizenship and rights to vote before. This was about allowing them to be in the census. Because
that's right.
That's the Constitution said they shan't be included in the census, but they certainly, or you could call them second-class citizens, but they were citizens, and there'd been a lot done up until that point to provide Aborigines with equal rights, and a lot had been achieved with reconciliation by that time as well. People forget that this was, it's not just a thing that was invented 30 years ago. Reconciliation.
No.
Even in the 50s and 60s, even under de Menzies, who they claim that the left claim he was a racist, but he even though the White Australia policy wasn't beginning to be dismantled, it was after his prime ministership. He certainly did a lot in terms of Indigenous advancement, and also making Australia a player in Asia.
Well, that's true. I mean, but unfortunately, multiculturalism or the dismantle of a White Australia party has brought its problems. It's actually created these laws to protect multiculturalism, for example, and if that's the price of having a multicultural society, then it's failed because we have less freedom than we did.
I want to go back to the state of patriot activism now, because there was a lot of hope at the beginning of the year with Fraser Anning's Conservative National Party, because he had the best objective way to describe him is the closest thing that the Australian Parliament had to a traditionalist Australian nationalist. He was elected as a One Nation senator, but as has occurred a lot of the time with Pauline Hanson's elected representatives, they've fallen out with her. He left on the first day. He joined Katter's Australian Party for a while, but they decided he was too much for them. And his Facebook page, Fraser Anning, got over 120,000 Facebook likes. Beginning in January, he was at the St Kilda political meeting about the African crime that had been occurring there.
Yep.
And he gained a lot of condemnation for meeting shaking hands with Blair and Neil. And then obviously an event that was out of everyone's control was the Christchurch massacre at the mosque, and that's when his Melbourne political meeting happened the next day with Egg Boy.
Yeah, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Because I want to throw a snipe at was it Jacinta Ardern? That's the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Yes.
I want to ask her a question. Because you talk about the massacre of 51 Muslims in Christchurch. Let me ask you this. How the hell did a foreigner obtain a firearms license in New Zealand?
Well, they've got a royal commission into it, and it's been revealed that he shouldn't have been granted a firearms license. And
the reason why they gave him one is so that they can come up with draconian gun laws, so that they've copped it the way we have.
Well, that's a theory.
Well, hang on. It's not a theory, right? Because now they've banned semi-automatic rifles. And the question is not theory. How is it that a foreign citizen was able to get a firearms license in a foreign country? It doesn't matter that you're across the ditch, because if I had dual citizenship, right, and my father was a New Zealander, right, and someone dobbed me in and I tried to enter a parliament, I'm not eligible for parliament under Section 44. So that question remains. How is it that a foreigner obtained a gun licence in New Zealand? It was almost like that firearms licence in Victoria. Handgun licence, and that man was from Hong Kong. Then he went to RMIT or somewhere like that and shot a couple of people dead.
When was that?
That was back in the early 2000s.
That was the 2002 Monash shooting. That's
Monash, yes.
With 2 people died, but because it was less than 4, it wasn't considered a mass shooting.
No, but
even though that's a pretty scary thing to happen at a university campus.
Yeah, and it's pretty scary that, you know, our so-called, you know, police commissioner's office granted a licence to a foreigner. Just sort of saying, you know, because Victoria...
That's why I said it was a theory. I didn't use the C word.
No, I mean, look, it's circumstantial, but...
Now, it's just past the top of the hour. I'm going to put the entropy link in again. We should have time at the end for a bit of Q&A. There is a question already, but I might keep it to the end because it's sort of a bit off topic, but we will get to it. Yeah. We do have to finish in 30 minutes because the DFL Trans weekly live stream is on, and so we sort of agreed that we don't encroach on each other's time.
Sweet.
Now, even after he was censured by the Parliament, by the Senate, Fraser Anning, for his statement post the Christchurch massacre. He still continued to gain likes on Facebook, and there was, in a short amount of time, he was able to field a lot of candidates, nearly every seat in Queensland, and quite a number here in Victoria as well, and there were no candidate scandals, which I know that the mainstream media they were digging as much as they could to embarrass Fraser Anning, but he in Queensland only got about 1% of the Senate votes. All the you'd say the ordinary people who'd call themselves patriots or nationalists still voted for Pauline Hanson's One Nation, and so Malcolm Roberts got back into the Senate. He'd been knocked out because of Section 44, and that's how Fraser Anning was elected to Parliament in the first place. And so, even though there was that sort of momentum there, there's still another 2.5 years to the next federal election, but that obviously that didn't turn into votes, that sort of momentum there. And as I mentioned, everyone's banned from Facebook and Twitter except you, and so that's why I say the Australian Patriot Movement is a bit of a lull. Nobody really knows what to do.
Well, we've got to change our language and start talking about things which, you know, and I'm saying this in context, being what is perceived so extreme. We've got to start talking about things and start, you know, all right, okay, if you're in Parliament, for example, what do you envision for Australia, right? Okay, if we're talking about infrastructure project, why is Australia suffering drought?
Well, that's because of the mismanagement of the Murray-Darling Basin.
Well, it's not only that. It's not only that. I mean, as a nation-building project, which includes agriculture, industry, rail, and the environment, we should have drought-proofed the East Coast by bringing water down from the north, right? Okay, proper nation-building projects, right? We've got to start talking things which are going to resonate with people, because the things that will resonate with people are jobs, right?
Yeah, and economic security.
Yes.
I mean, you only have to look at the fact that real wages are not rising, keeping up with inflation, and that's our government has assisted in killing our manufacturing sector through green and red tape, and now we're in a man-made drought.
Well, that's right. I mean, the Lima Agreement helped to put ourselves in the situation that we're in now.
So it's going to be tough times in Australia, and our leaders are too cowardly to basically make the tough decisions, which might upset the vested interest, but will do the right thing by the quiet Australians, as Scott Morrison, he thanks for his re-election victory. And there's a lot of mainstream conservatives who are saying, Scott Morrison, why haven't you teared up the Murray-Darling Basin agreement yet?
Well, look, unfortunately, people get momentarily pissed off and they exercise a bit of power at the ballot box. So
Bradfield scheme, that's
right?
Peter V has talked about that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, exactly. And unfortunately, when the ballot box is over, that's where it seems to finish. Look, I've got an idea. I'm going to personally sort of start talking about this more on my own channel. I want to try and get a fighting fund actually started, where I'd have 2 signatories to the account. Anyone who donates would get like a quarterly newsletter to see this fighting fund. And we need to get together with the right sort of people to start challenging laws, right, that are beyond the scope of the legislator.
Because the way that laws get struck down if they're unconstitutional is that somebody has to launch a legal challenge.
That's right.
To it. If nobody challenges it, then it will stay on the books.
And unfortunately, right, you've got to remember, and Monis and the Commonwealth is proof of this, right, we've got to raise enough money to not only challenge the case, right, but we've got to raise enough money to actually pay the opposition if we do lose.
Yes, because that's if you lose, then
you're liable for the cost of the defendant, right? Okay, and if we challenge, say, Section 25 too, to the High Court in its validity, right? And there's a variety of argument in its validity, whether it's consistency, applied political communication, right? The intent of the legislation. There's a few things that can be applied, but if you lose, you're liable for the costs, and that's going to be, unfortunately, part of Blair's judgment against him.
Well, as we talked about before, Israel Folau, he had the not just the public support, but the public put their money where their mouth was. The Australian Christian Lobby raised $2 million for him, which, well, that's why, well, you were disappointed that he settled. Obviously, the Australian Christian Lobby, they're going to use that money for other religious freedom battles, and it was not the Australian Christian Lobby, but their legal project, which is the Human Rights Law Alliance. That was founded by Martin Iles before he became the director of the Christian lobby. And obviously, as we said, Israel Folau's legal battles are not over with this complaint, and it's something that the Christian community has.
I'm going to tell you something as a Christian, right? And I know not everyone who listens to this program is a Christian, right? But I'm telling you, as a Christian, God never commanded Israel Folau to put away his sword in his sheath, right? He commanded him to battle on. He had the opportunity and the means to do it, right? And unfortunately now, he's got another battle. So he's going to end up fighting a battle one way or another.
And certainly Gary Burns is not going to settle with him, or Israel Folau shouldn't cede. I wouldn't expect him to cede to Gary Burns's demands, just like Bernard Gaynor didn't.
Well, I mean, he's got to be prepared to wear that, because I quite frankly don't give a damn what laws that our government wants to put in. Right, I'll exercise my Christian faith. Right, even if it becomes against the law. Because Acts 5:28, just like the disciples before the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees, I ought to obey God rather than man. So they're going to have to put up with that. And it's simple as that. Israel Folau should have gone to Rugby Australia, not settling. Right? You must fully apologise. You must completely yield, because they went too far. And Rugby Union Australia was, I believe, it's been getting around that one Alan Joyce from Qantas leaned upon it.
Yes, that's what a lot of people have.
But that's speculation,
yes.
Of course.
Well, he's getting bad press again because the Jetstar workers are taking industrial action to on the holiday Christmas period.
Yep.
And Alan Joyce, he's basically the same. How he deals with the unions is the same how he deals with political battles as well.
Yeah, he's just used his corporate power to bully. That's all he's done. So
now I want to get your perspective, because even though things in Australia have been relatively quiet, there has been some optimism over in the United States with, I'm not sure if you've been following that, the Groyper wars, where Donald Trump, he won against the will of the Republican establishment, but now the establishment is trying to own him, and the most prominent organization is Turning Point USA, which is led by Charlie Kirk, who's around 25 years old. It's a student group, and he's basically trying to sell conservatism as social progressivism, but with free market principles. That's sort of the summary, and that we need to embrace what the left believed 15 years ago to be electorally viable. And so the Groypers, it's named after a pose that Pepe the Frog does like this. Their unofficial lieutenant has been Nicholas J. Fuentes, who's host of America First on YouTube. He's only 21 years old, Generation Z. He calls himself a Zoomer, and obviously a lot of people have said he's quite young. He's a bit immature, but you can't deny his talent and his knowledge, and the fact that the as they're called, the Groyper Army, they kept challenging Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA on 3 issues, which was basically mass immigration, because Turning Point USA said they were only against illegal immigration. They still wanted the best and brightest from all across the world. And the Groyper's argument was, no, if you demographically change America, you're going to change America politically. Look at all the traditionally red states like California and Virginia that have flipped blue, which is Democrats now. And now Virginia is, the Democrats are in charge. They're wanting to implement gun confiscation and also dual loyalties. They tended to focus on Charlie Kirk's support for Israel, and that if you're America first, how can you be for Israel as well? And also they question him on his support for social progressivism as well. And Charlie Kirk crumbled. He tried to ignore that this was happening.
I can't really comment on that because I haven't really been following it a lot.
But what do you think of what these Groypers, America First, what they're putting to Charlie Kirk? I've just summarised the 3 issues there, and they've managed to get concessions from, as they're called, Conservative Inc.
Well, look, I agree that, it's the irony that, the amount of trouble they go to display loyalty to Israel is just bizarre. But because Israel is a sovereign nation, it should really have nothing to do with the United States. But that's not the reality with the influence of Jewish lobby groups such as AIPAC, for example. But look, we give titles to certain things, like social progressivism and all that sort of thing, right? A society that advances, right, is a progressive society. But what do you mean by advancement?
Well, they mean another term for social progressivism is understood these days as basically promoting degeneracy, because they're accusing Charlie Kirk of basically not displaying enough alarm about things like drag queen story hour at the local.
Well, that's not
library.
progressivism. That's the opposite.
Yes,
it's the opposite. I mean,
but you know how the terminology is being co-opted.
A progressive society to me is a society that innovates, right? Works towards scientific advancement, cures for disease, improves living conditions, right? And to, obviously, I've got no issue with, gradually finding cleaner energy sources, for example, so that we look after our home that we live in. Okay, so that's what I would consider progressive type policy or politic, right? When we're talking about, rights of drag queens and LGBT and gender fluidity, that's not progressive. That's just degenerative, backwards, anti-God, bloody.
And also another cause that the Groypers have championed, and it's got a bit of traction by some conservative Republican congressmen, that there needs to be greater restrictions on access to pornography, because of basically how that is ruining primarily men's sexuality.
Look, the ultimate cure for that is to follow God, right? Because it's in that little book that all these atheists say is a fairy tale, right? I've been married 21 years, right? My wife and I have a wonderful love life. We've got no chance of getting diseases or anything like that, sexually transmitted diseases, because we are monogamous. We are faithful to one another. It's a pretty simple concept. And
that's what the lifestyle that the Groypers are promoting as well.
I've got no issue with that. I've got no issue. The more we do that, because, for example, on the issue of abortion, right? You want to reduce abortion? Well, you've got to improve the mindset of people in attitudes regarding sexuality, right? And, the more liberal sexuality comes, the more dangerous it is and more destructive it is. It's as simple as that.
I want to now go to the UK.
Yep.
So obviously for the past decade, Tommy Robinson has been that nation's most prominent patriot activist. It started when he founded the English Defence League.
Oh, the guy that kisses the Wailing Wall, yeah.
And that's what's happened now. That he's left the EDL now and's basically had a media career. He worked for Rebel Media for a while, and after that he started TR News, which Avi Yemeni, who he originally, he's from Melbourne, but he travels overseas quite a bit and does most of his
during election times too.
Work now through TR News, and obviously Tommy Robinson has been in and out of jail for the live streaming outside the Muslim gang grooming trial. But you mentioned there the fact, probably the most damning photo ever of him is with the Mossad shirt on. Yeah. And so a lot of people have said you're supposed to be for Britain, England first, and you're saying that a foreign intelligence agency is really cool. And there's also been a lot of scrutiny on Tommy Robinson, the donations that he's received, what's happened with them, what return have working class people got. And it's seen the return of, a blast from the past in Mark Collett, who was the youth, one of the youth leaders of the British National Party in the 2000s. And in the summer of 2002, there were two documentaries based on him, a Channel 4 one, called Young Nazi and Proud, and a Russell Brand documentary called Nazi Boy. He was just 22 at the time, but even though he said some silly things in those things, which by 2019 standards you just call it sort of edgelord stuff, but he was a formidable political campaigner in the 2000s, and the British National Party got 2 MEPs at the 2009 European elections, and he's made it he's had a child now, so obviously he's
calmed down. He's obviously
and you should really check out. I'm not sure if you've checked out his.
I'm being too busy, Tim.
Yes, I'm saying that if you do get some time, you should definitely watch Mark Collett's Patriotic Weekly Review, or because he's incredibly articulate, and he for a number of years was supportive of Tommy Robinson, but Tommy's people have just said, Mark Collett's a Nazi, you shouldn't follow him, and so Mark's fought back now, and he's now presented himself as the authentic Britain First person.
I tell you what, there'll be those that are of the progressive side of politics, right, who thinks anyone's a Nazi who's right of Karl Marx. So, I mean, those labels are too easy to use. And by the way, I've criticised Israel. I've criticised the Jewish religion, right? Why shouldn't I? I'm a Christian. Their Talmud says that Jesus was a sorcerer and that Mary was a whore. So, I mean, why shouldn't I criticise the tenets of religion? People are quite quick to have a go at the tenets of my faith. And you know what? I don't like it. But hey, by all means, right? Religion should be criticised. You know what I mean?
And Tommy Robinson, you have to remember that his whole activism, even right back to his English Defence League days, was just about Islam, how it wasn't compatible with classically liberal British values. And so the English Defence League, it actually had a Sikh division, it had a Jewish division, it had an LGBT division, basically all of these various other groups that Islam has been in conflict with. And Tommy Robinson, he doesn't care about the demographic changes in Britain. To him, it's all about values. While Mark Collett is that I care about the indigenous people of the island. Well,
I have to agree with that. And to be honest with you, I'm going to put something way out there, right? I still, from a historical point of view, I'm being more pragmatic these days because we're living in 2019. Look, the bottom line is, I wish Australia was still more Anglo than what it is now, but it's not. Okay? And if some organisation came along and said to me, okay, what's going to happen is we're going to have a bit of a migration shift, right? We want lands to go back to traditional peoples, and they offered me a compensation like they do to Jews of Israel. Do you want to return to England, Chris, because your ancestry is there? I would deeply consider it, because the land of my ancestors is England and Scotland, right? My late mother was from Blackburn, which was north of Liverpool, right? And married into the Cameron clan because of her maiden name, right? So I really would consider that. Unfortunately for me, right, my barb against multiculturalism and the statements against multiculturalism is that what they're basically saying to me is that you, as someone of English or Anglo ancestry, we don't have a culture. That's why we've got to enrich it. All right?
And Mark Collett recently helped produce, but he makes sure that credit goes to Laura Towler, who's another British nationalist. She made a documentary, We Were Never Asked, which was basically it was backed up by already carried out surveys, but just basically went to people in English towns to say, were you ever asked that you wanted this mass migration? And the answer that they got from most people was no. And it's the same with Australia. We were never asked. I talked about the preamble of the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act. Australia's a multicultural nation.
Because someone else made it that way.
Yes, and it's the same here. And of course, when Fraser Anning, he proposed a people's vote on immigration. That was in his maiden speech. Well, that was also rejected because he used the phrase that it needs to be a final solution.
I want to be specific because I'm English of ancestry, okay? Right? I'm not European, okay? Right? I'm English.
Well, Europe's a continent.
Yeah, I'm a Briton, right? That's my ancestry, okay? And you know what I am most fond of from English ancestry more than anything? Magna Carta and the development of common law that came from Magna Carta and the separation of church and state. Because remember, England had a civil war, the parliamentarians versus the royals.
Yes.
Okay? And at the end of the day, right, that is English. It's not French. It's not bloody... Because, you know what? Europe, in a way, that's why sort of in principle I'm fond of Brexit, because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Europe is separate from the UK, right? Because Europe has been a hotbed for tyrants.
Well, we saw in the just past UK general election that Britain itself, because it is made up of the Anglo people and the Celtic people, and the Celtic people of Scotland and Northern Ireland, they voted for national, ethnic or regional nationalists, whatever you want to call them, who want to secede from the Union.
Yeah.
It's been a 50-plus year battle in Northern Ireland between the Unionists and the Republicans. The Scottish National Party, they don't want to become a republic. They just want to be a Commonwealth like we are in Australia. But that just shows you that even supposedly how diversity is our strength, that now the Scottish people are saying we don't want to be in this union with the English people anymore.
Well, that's something that goes back centuries. You know what I mean? So,
but
I mean,
which is it hasn't gone away.
No.
Even the Union, the United Kingdom, is it's still having what you'd say are these.
It has issues. It certainly does. I mean, my ancestry is probably as much Scottish as it is English, because my mum's north of the border and I'm a throwback. Because when I went to England in 2018, I can tell you something now, I look more bloody English than some of the English, right, these days. Because I'm very Anglo in my makeup, red hair, blue eyes, that goes back to what is essentially above Hadrian's Wall, mate. But, look, unfortunately, we're in a predicament today, and look, the contradiction that I have, with my ancestry and everything like that, I wrote an article, my last article I wrote for UNA was, there is no white genocide, right? Nationalists have to get over that, right? It's white suicide, right? We want this, not me personally, but white people wanted this diversity.
It's the white, and it's also the white Extinction Rebellion activists who are choosing not to have children.
Exactly, they want it, right? We're committing cultural suicide, right? And unfortunately, this is not the first time it's happened in human history, okay? But we're committing it. Our generation doesn't want to be nationalist, right? Our generation doesn't want.
We've got about 5 minutes left until Dear Beltran's live stream starts, so we've got time for. There's only there's a question and a super chat. The question is from Throttle Grim. Which law can we cite against those who grant access to foreign entity intent on conquering our people? I think he's talking about, or they are talking about, how a lot of our farmland and companies are being sold to Chinese Communist Party backed entities.
Look up the laws of sedition, right? Because sedition is the overthrow of the Commonwealth, and it doesn't have to be by violent means. But a lot of, just quickly too, when it comes to international treaties, right? They're not against the Constitution, right? Because international treaties are non-binding. It's only once elements or parts of international treaties become legislated to become domestic version of those treaties where it becomes law in our country. ACCA, the Racial Discrimination Act, okay? And the High Court ruled that the Racial Discrimination Act was constitutionally acceptable under Section 51, subsection 29, which is External Affairs, and that was Kuartha and Bioki Peterson, 1983.
And we have got a super chat for $3 It's from Pissy Leaks with Peter Grace. I'm sure you're aware of who Peter Grace is. It's one of the sort of he likes to battle with the patriot movement online with his.
You know what? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. You don't want Peter Grace to actually critique you, then on our side of the fence, lift your game, because you give them plenty of fuel.
Well, this is a super chat that was said. Peter Grace pissed his pants so much that he flooded the joinery cafe underneath. He also tried to join the Proud Boys but got denied, and now he writes them love poems.
Look, I find a lot of his stuff pretty funny, so...
So we'll wrap it up now. Obviously, tomorrow will be the judgment delivered by Chief Judge of the County Court, Peter Gibb. That's at 10 a.m.
Yep.
I'll be there to cover it.
Yep.
And I'll do a summary on my next Wilms Front program, which will be 7 p.m. Melbourne time on Friday night. But there is an Uncuckables episode that will be 8:30 p.m. Tomorrow night on its YouTube channel, and also on D Live as well, because we stream to both YouTube and D Live.
Yep.
Now, Melbourne time, I should add, where obviously we will be going through the verdict, but we're also going to be joined by the British nationalist I just mentioned, Mark Collett, who's joining us for the full show, which we're quite excited about, and so are our audience.
Yeah. Good.
We are going full steam ahead. We'll take a bit of a break for Christmas, but obviously the news is still happening here, and obviously the heat is causing a lot of news commentary to be written as well. But thanks for coming in, Chris. I know that it's you come from far away in Melbourne, but on this hot day, I've appreciated you coming down, and based on the audience we've had tonight, they've certainly enjoyed you sharing your thoughts and what you've learnt in your legal studies.
No, thanks. I appreciate that, Tim, and we just got to push forward and keep prosecuting our cause. Don't give up.
And of course, if you want to continue to support the work of The Unshackled, we have our membership program and our donation form online. And remember to keep checking out theunshackled.net on a regular basis for our commentary. My colleague Steel Archer's detonation program will be back tomorrow. Please enjoy now Dia Beltran. I think it's her last Wednesday night live stream for the year. So enjoy that, and I will see you again tomorrow night for the Uncockables.
Thanks for tuning in to Wilms Front. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.